try to speak for just around 15 minutes. And thanks a lot to Annette for organizing this session with Johan, and also for inviting me to submit an abstract. I think this is a great chance to meet good colleagues and to exchange the results from our research. And as I hope that you will all be able to see, after my presentation, I think it's some of the current differences in legislation and archaeological practice in the different countries around the North Sea, which is really responsible for a very different source material from country to country. And this will change, I think, yes. With the introduction of developer-paid rescue archaeology in Denmark following the Museum Act of 2001, the number of excavations in Denmark increased significantly. During the same time, also metal detecting has simply gone through the roof, and the sheer number of finds are putting great pressure on the Danefæ system in Denmark, the treasure trove system, which is run by the National Museum in collaboration with the local museums. Also, as you can see from the map, the level of metal detecting differs a lot from region to region. We have extreme lots of metal detecting on the island of Bornholm, you see over there, and also on Sealand and parts of Funen, while parts of Jutland still isn't that well covered. And these excavations and metal finds are producing vast amounts of data, but sadly the great majority of both the metal finds and the excavations remain to be analyzed. However, the extent and number of both settlements and finds exceed any previous expectations. And here are just a few examples from my own backyard, which has been excavated within the last 10 years. And it's only 3% of the Danish landmass, and you could do the same for any other archaeological museum in Jutland. So obviously, we are dealing with a huge material that needs to be published and made accessible to research. Entire townlands and villages have been excavated since 2001. In recent years, also other sources have become accessible to archaeologists. Detailed cadastral maps from the late 18th and early 19th century are now online and can be put into GIS systems. And it is possible to reconstruct the pre-industrial agrarian landscape with great precision. You can build from the small townland of Little Darm and then just take the next one and so on. And in that way you could actually reconstruct entire landscapes. Also many place name records are now online and can also be put into GIS-based systems. So really for anybody interested, it's a real candy shop just waiting to be robbed. And in this paper, I will focus on the west coast of Jutland and point towards some surprisingly long-lived trends in the settlement structures. The different data sets all point towards that the pre-industrial agrarian society based on family-run farmsteads did not change much. A small village in the 5th century was also a small village in the 18th century. What was central places housing aristocrats in the first millennium later became medieval towns. But it's not all continuity, and I'll start with the climate data and compare it to some archaeological data sets. In my view, there are a series of different data sets which support the idea that something drastic happened during the 6th and 7th century. Climate research has shown that a series of volcanic eruptions in 536, 537 and 540 in combination with low solar activity caused a cooling period affecting the entire northern hemisphere and stretching to around 660. This climate period has been coined the Late Antique Little Ice Age, or Lalia. If we turn to Scandinavia, it has been difficult to find settlements from this period, and it still is today. As the datasets from excavations grow, we become more and more able to look into what really happened in the 7th century. And in his recent PhD, Jesper Hansen from Odense worked with settlements on the island of Funen. And in this landscape, it is very clear that a major break occurred in the 7th century. All the individual lines in that diagram represent one site, and it is very clear that something drastic happened, that there's a major hiatus in the 7th century. Also, other data sets from excavations point in this direction. The dendrochronologist Aoife Daly has put together a quite large random sample of dendrodates. They're mapped here using the last preserved year ring. I don't know if you can see it, but we have the date down here, 200, 300, 400, 500, and so on. And again, you can see that there is a major hiatus there in the 7th century. Perhaps speaking against the idea of a major decline after 550 are the finds from metal detecting, where types of a younger Germanic Iron Age date are quite common. Stuff like small equal arm brooches, beak brooches, or bird brooches, as many of you probably know. But I think to some point this could be explained in the same way as the many gold sacrifices from the same period. They represent more or less desperate attempts to appease the gods. So when putting it all together, I think there is every reason to believe that the cooling period between 536 and 660 did in fact create a major ecological crisis in Scandinavia, the Fimbul winter, as it was called in Old Norse mythology, leading to a drastic decline in population. Of course, some people survived, and they did not lack neither natural resources nor arable land in the time to come. But it was a game changer. And now returning to the west coast of Jutland. By using a church tax list from around 1325, covering the entire diocese of Ribe, an economic map covering the west coast of Jutland can be reconstructed. It is quite obvious that the entire coastal zone was able to pay high taxes before another cooling period, the Little Ice Age, and the Little Ice Age led to both increased flooding, sand drift, and erosion on the west coast. But before that, life was obviously better on the west coast than it was to become in the early modern period. And the same picture can be seen if you look at the vast amounts of settlements known from crop marks in western Jutland, as you can see on this map. There were 4 medieval towns on the west coast. Ribe, as most of you probably know, being the oldest and most important one, while the others, Tønder, Varde, and Ringkøbing, were founded during the 12th and 13th century. And all 4 towns seem to have predecessors in the form of elite manors or residences. If we start by Ribe, we have the interesting site of Dankirke quite close by, which was excavated between 1965 and 1970 by the National Museum and is still largely unpublished, at least the vast finds material. But here at Dankirke, both the finds and structures are quite spectacular, and they display sort of the religious life and aristocratic behavior of a family that lived on the site for almost 500 years. So Dankirke was an obvious elite site or central place, but on a smaller scale than what we know from other parts in Denmark, like Gudme and Sortemuld and Ubåkra and so on. There are some other finds from Dankirke, it's very good. If we turn to around Ringkøbing, we have the interesting site of Dejbjerg nearby. The Romanesque church, which is there, is situated just beside a small manor, Dejbjerg Lund, known since the Middle Ages. The first part of the place name, Dejbjerg, means hill of the dead, implying some sort of sacred connotation, while the last part of the place name, Lund, may have a religious meaning, being a sacrificial grove. In the nearby bog, the two famous Dybjerg wagons were found in 1888. They are actually just from before BC, but are very nice and point to some sort of cultic activities. And in 1969, in the village, or just outside the village, a late Viking Age tool chest was found just near the Romanesque church. Only very limited excavation has been done, but in 1993, a burnt down hall building from the 6th century was found containing drinking glasses, as you also saw from Dankirke. And on the surrounding fields, there are lots of crop marks indicating the presence of pit houses. Though patchy due to the nature of the data and the absence of excavation, the Dybjerg site appears to have been an aristocratic residence with traces of cultic activities and feasting since before the birth of Christ. The site later developed into a church site and medieval manor, and by combining the place names with historical sources and archaeology, the pattern becomes quite clear. We seem to be dealing with an aristocratic continuity spanning the most of 2 millennia. Analysis giving the same results can be made for both Tønder, where the famous golden horns from the 5th century were found just north of town, and where a large manor owned by the Ribe bishop is known since the 13th century. At Varde, we have the Hornelund site with a sacred place name, a rune stone, and a very fine hoard from around 1000 AD. So from the look of things, all 4 medieval towns have predecessors in the form of aristocratic sites, in some cases going back to before BC. So what we are seeing on the west coast of Jutland is that we had some very good living conditions before the Little Ice Age. We seem to be dealing with, and it's a bit provocative perhaps, sort of middle-class society where you have very large groups of family-based farms where the inhabitants had access to copper alloy jewelry. So this could be something that you could call free farmers, but of course you have to discuss what is free in that sense of the word. And we also have, of course, a present aristocracy, but it's a very diverse group. It's not just the high aristocracy, but they go from very poor to very wealthy, much like what we know from the medieval period, at least in Jutland. And perhaps not very surprising, also the richest families seem to occupy the best sites in the landscape when you look at both infrastructure, communication, and so on. And they were the sites that also became later medieval towns. Thank you.